Hello, welcome to Chapter Book Storytime. I'm Ellen from EVPL Oakland Library, and on today's edition of the Variety Pack, I have a new author with her first novel, and it's an award winner. Each year, the American Library Association gives out prizes for the best in children's literature, and this is one of the honor books. It's called 𝐸𝑎𝑔𝑙𝑒 by Nasugraq Rainey Hopson. 𝐸𝑎𝑔_Drums is a retelling of an ancient Iñupiaq tale. The Iñupiaq people are the indigenous people who live above the Arctic Circle. And Nasugraq Rainey Hopson is Iñupiaq. This was a challenging book to read because a lot of the words, especially the names and some of the names for the animals and some of the ancient customs and things, they're all in the Iñupiaq language. And it doesn't always sound like English. It doesn't sound like English. It has some different sounds that are made, some different letters. They're drawn in different ways. So it was quite a challenge. I made sure that I listened to the audiobook because the audiobook on Libby is read by an indigenous person, and so I was hoping to get the pronunciation right. So I do apologize for any errors that I make, but it was a lot of fun to read, and I hope you like it too. Let's get started. This is a story of Iñupiaq, a young boy who is a very good hunter. At the start of the book, he has just killed 12 caribou. That's his job, to hunt and get meat that they can preserve to keep them fed through the winter. It's very interesting to see how he follows the rituals of the Iñupiaq people, thanking the animal for the gift of its life and the meat that will help them get through the winter, and releasing the spirit from the body to go into the world. And it's very interesting to observe. A few years earlier, he would have been doing this hunting with his two older brothers. But unfortunately, they have both died under mysterious circumstances. Each one has gone up on a separate occasion into the mountains and has never returned, and no one knows where they are. So you can imagine when it's time for Iñupiaq to go up into the mountains to get obsidian, which is a stone that they sharpen into knives that they can use for hunting and for cleaning hides and getting furs ready. You can tell that his parents are a little nervous, and they're fussing over him as he's packing his bags. And you can almost see Iñupiaq rolling his eyes and saying, "Oh, Mom," when she's fussing over him. But he understands why they're worried, because this is his first trip up the mountain since his brothers have died. I'm going to start. The father's going to speak first. They're getting him ready to go. "It rained a few days ago. The lower trail might be wet. Maybe take the upper trail at the point," his father said. Again, the boy raised his eyebrows in agreement while he slipped on his waterproof socks, making sure to tighten the straps of his caribou skin boots so that they would not slip around when he walked. "I'm not a child anymore," he thought. "I know what I'm doing." His father glanced at his wife and sighed, then went back to wrapping the rope into a neat coil. As soon as his pack was ready, the boy touched foreheads with his parents, ignoring the worry lines on their faces, and ducked down into the entrance tunnel. The day was cool and breezy. Above him stretched a sky of the purest blue. The morning fog had quickly been burned away by the rising sun, and the intense red of the bearberry leaves on the ground competed with the bright yellow of the willow leaves. More than once as he walked, he startled fat lemmings gathering food. Their tiny, round rodent bodies erupted out of the grass and dashed ahead of him, whiskers twitching in annoyance, cheek pouches full, as they worked in a frenzy to get ready for winter. After many hours of steady, uneventful walking, the boy had almost reached the mountains proper. The slopes were jagged and stark against the sky, rising to block his view to the east. He could smell the sharp fragrance of ice and snow that rolled down from them, mixing with the warmer, earthy smells of the tundra. The calls of the seabirds had long since disappeared, replaced by the chattering of ground squirrels. Soon enough, the marshy tundra would be replaced completely by the dry, brittle stones of the mountain slopes. He would reach the place of obsidian a little past midday. He had chosen the best route and was traveling fast. Glad that the first half of his trip was almost complete, he decided to stop and eat. He found a small boulder to sit on, slipped his bow and arrows off his shoulder, and carefully unwrapped the paste that his mother had prepared for him. It was his favorite traveling food, berries and dried caribou meat suspended in whipped caribou fat. His mother had even added the leaves of a red flower that grew near their camp, a special tangy treat that made his mouth fill with saliva. After eating and drinking a good measure of creek water from his water pouch, he closed his eyes and listened to the sounds of the Nuna, listening to the world around him speak. To his left, a marmot whistled a warning. A heavy bumblebee vibrated above his head. The soft, sparkling sounds of tiny rocks tumbling down a nearby cliff drifted to him. As always, the sounds centered him. They quieted the echo of his parents' worries. Suddenly, a golden eagle yipped, announcing itself. Its cry made the boy shiver with surprise as his eyes flew open wide. Golden eagles usually stayed farther inland, near more favorable hunting grounds. Excited, the boy searched the sky for the silhouette of the great bird, wondering if it would be close enough to catch. But the sky was empty. The boy kept scanning above him, sure that the eagle would soon appear. Another series of cries rippled over the tundra. These were much closer and came not from above the boy, but from down low, in front of him. The boy turned toward the sound. The golden eagle hurtled toward him with an alarming speed, a mere 5 feet above the ground, so close that the boy could see the slight adjustments it made mid-flight for the buffeting winds. The bird was huge, at least 3 times the boy's height, from wingtip to wingtip. He had never seen a bird of this size. Its body gleamed gold in the sun, copper accents flashing at each feather tip. As it got closer, talons as long as the boy's forearm gleamed black in the sunlight and swung out in front of the great beast. Slowly, the boy realized what the bird was doing. It was coming in for a kill, swift and dangerous. Its eyes were focused on him. Chapter 3, Savik. The boy threw his body to the side. Too late, he realized that his bow and arrows were out of reach. He rolled again, pulling his obsidian knife from his belt. Dread flooded his mind like cold water, but with determination and resolve, and more than a little fear, he leapt up into a crouch, knife held low in front of him. He braced himself for impact, breathing harshly through his clenched teeth. But nothing hit him. Instead, the air swirled around Iñupiaq, catching his hair and throwing bits of dirt into his eyes. He heard the sound of claws digging into stone, making his teeth itch. He turned his head toward where the noise was coming from. He saw the eagle had settled onto the boulder where he'd been sitting just moments before. The great bird scrutinized the boy, shifting its head side to side, holding its razor-sharp beak agape, wings pulled away from its body in readiness, muscles tense, body poised to launch. The boy remained motionless, mind racing as he took stock of the situation, afraid to trigger the bird's attack instinct by moving. The world slowed down as Iñupiaq's heartbeat sped up. 100 thoughts poured through his mind. The bird seemed winded from its flight, but it was large enough and quick enough to take him down without trouble. His light caribou skin parka would offer no protection against talons made to rip and shred. There was nowhere to hide on the open tundra nearby, besides a few small and flimsy willow brushes. The knife he held would barely scratch the bird. He cursed himself for not carrying his father's heavy throwing spears. His breath quickened. If the eagle attacked now, it would be a fight to the death. His instincts screamed to run, to put an object between them, or to surprise the bird and attack first. But he held his body as still as he could and slowed his breathing. His attention became razor sharp as he focused on every single movement the bird made. The great bird cocked its head from one side to the other slowly, eyeing the boy with a predatory intensity. The pauses became longer between head swings, as though it was thinking about what it saw. After a few tense moments, the bird relaxed, lifted its head, and dropped its shoulders, tucking the great wings along its body. The beak closed with an audible slap. The boy stayed crouched, waiting. Maybe the bird would judge him too much a fight, prey not worth the energy to take down. Maybe it would leave. Maybe. Finally, the eagle seemed to reach a decision. It stretched and flapped its wings once, which almost made the boy turn and run. Then the great bird began to shudder and shake its head. Confused, the boy just stared. Soon the head shaking turned almost violent. Small feathers drifted to the ground as the bird tossed its head from side to side, and the topmost part of it began to peel away. The feathers receded as if being sloughed off, and with one final shake, the bird's face came down like a hood around its shoulders. The author is also the illustrator of the book, and so here's one of her drawings. In front of Piña, there now stood a man, clothed in a parka made of golden feathers tipped in shining copper. The man was at least 2 heads taller than the boy, with wide, heavily muscled shoulders. He had a clean-shaven, square-jawed face. Heavy brows framed dark hooded eyes that dug into the boy. For what seemed like hours, the 2 creatures, man and boy, stood facing each other. The boy was still crouched with the knife in front of him. The man, again shifting his head bird-like, examined him. Soon the muscles of Piña's legs began to cramp, but he ignored the pain and kept his eyes trained on the man's face, trying to read whether the man meant him harm. He had never had to read a stranger's face before. I would have better luck reading a rock. The boy knew what this creature was. Underneath his fear, stories crept up from Piña's memory. He heard his mother's voice speaking of animals while she sewed. Animals are like us, Piña, she'd say, and she'd take a stitch. They have all the same parts as us. Another stitch. They choose to be animals, but when they need to be human, they take off their parkas, and then they are human for a while. Another stitch. Respect them as you would any strong spirit, and never challenge them. You will always lose. Never disrespect any animal. They have long memories. A being like this would never reveal themselves unless they had a purpose. Those who straddled the spiritual worlds did not interact with normal, everyday people like him. All of this flashed through the boy's mind. Respect, his mother had said. Piña knew this being, if he chose to, could kill him quickly. Piña knew also that if he did not act soon, his body would be too stiff from staying still and crouched for so long to move effectively, no matter what his plans. Taking a chance that he knew might lead to his death, the boy made a decision. Slowly, he lowered the knife and set it on the ground in front of him. Then he offered up his empty hands to the man. His body tensed at the sudden vulnerability, and he forced his hands to unfurl. The sweat on his open palms began to dry in the cool autumn air immediately. The piercing brown eyes watched his every movement, but the man gave no indication what he was thinking. And what if I knew what he was thinking? How would that help me? Piña took a deep, shaky breath, and for the first time in his life, he spoke before being addressed. Elder, he said, making sure his tone was soft and as non-threatening as he could muster. I beg forgiveness for my show of weapons. I was surprised by your appearance. His voice cracked, but he straightened his shoulders, his eyes cast slightly downward so as not to make too much eye contact. He glanced up to see the pupils in the man's eyes dilate with predatory gleam. He quickly glanced away again. Careful. Swallowing the tightness in his throat, he spoke again. Is there something you wish of me? The man began to laugh. It was deep and booming, filled with what sounded like genuine amusement. The laughter did little to relax Piña. The man tilted his head back. His teeth shone unnaturally white. Then he spoke. Your brothers were not as smart as you, youngest one. His voice was confident and filled with the space with its deep sound. The oldest, the tall one with a mouth on him, he attacked me as soon as I landed. He shook his head. Foolish. Amusement tinted the man's voice, but there was an undercurrent of disdain. The rounder one, the one that froze and did not speak, he refused my request in the end. Also foolish. The mention of his brothers made Piña's throat tighten, and he slowly lowered his hands to his sides. The grief he held for his brothers rose in his chest and gripped his heart. making this already surreal situation darker. He clenched his jaw at the flippant way the man described them. Even more on edge, he waited for the man's next move. "You may call me 𝑎𝑔𝑙𝑒, little boy." And indeed, the man reminded the boy of a knife, deadly and sharp. "It is a name that will do, easy for your human mouth to pronounce," said 𝑎𝑔𝑙𝑒. And then, so swiftly that the boy did not see the movement, the Eagle Man was standing in front of him. His face was so near that the boy could smell his breath, and it smelled of blood. "And as to what I wish of you, you will come with me now," he paused, "or you can die like your brothers. Choose now." Again, the way the man spoke about the end of his brothers' lives stung, clouding the level of fear he should have had. In that moment, the boy could only think of his parents. He knew that they would mourn him, as they mourned his brothers if he did not return. The thought of their deep sadness made him speak up again. "What of my parents? How long will I be gone? Who will care for them and hunt the land?" "Your parents will survive as they did when they lost the other sons. Come with me now, boy, or die. There are others who can take your place. Choose." The boy knew his parents would want him to live, for he would probably be the last child they could have. He knew he would try his best to return to them, but to do that, he needed to stay alive. He also knew that he could not go unarmed. He gestured to the boulder behind 𝑎𝑔𝑙𝑒. "I will go with you on the condition that I be allowed to take my bow." Again, the man laughed. "You may take your bow," he said. 𝑎𝑔𝑙𝑒 reached over and took the bow in his right hand. "But I won't have you annoying me with arrows at my back." With one long black fingernail, he severed the bowstring. "Bring your gear, boy. We will be walking a long distance. Do not try to flee. I will find you easily." With that, he tossed the bow to Iñupiaq, turned, and with long, determined strides began walking toward the mountains. The boy quickly gathered up his gear and followed the man, making sure not to leave anything behind for his parents to find. He hoped they would guess that he had met a different fate and that he would try to return. Chapter 4. Noise. 𝑎𝑔𝑙𝑒 and the boy traveled in silence. They pushed forward at a merciless pace. At first, Iñupiaq fought the urge to break the quietude with talking, a feeling he was unused to. But by the fourth night, that need was overshadowed by the strangeness of his journey. The lack of talking allowed him to focus on what was happening around him and gave him some time to observe the being that took him. 𝑎𝑔𝑙𝑒 would only stop when it was obvious that the boy could not go on any longer. The boy was amazed at 𝑎𝑔𝑙𝑒's stamina. The man never seemed to need rest. Every once in a while, he would catch 𝑎𝑔𝑙𝑒 popping his muscles and joints loudly with satisfied groans, or scratching vigorously at his thick, dark hair, as if his human form might be uncomfortable. At night, Iñupiaq would roll himself in his thin caribou sleeping bag, but 𝑎𝑔𝑙𝑒 would do his odd stretches and then fall asleep in a sitting position, with no extra covering. He found himself wondering, as he observed the man, if 𝑎𝑔𝑡𝑎𝑟 and 𝑚𝑎𝑙𝑒, those are his brothers, had been smarter than he was and had brought father's heavy spears. They were so much stronger than Iñupiaq in more ways than one. They had been gone for so many seasons, and yet the pain of their loss was fresh in his mind. With effort, he pushed his thoughts of his brothers away and tried his best to focus on his situation. Pay attention. With sudden dread, the boy remembered how winded 𝑎𝑔𝑙𝑒 had been at the boulder. He realized then that they must be a great distance from 𝑎𝑔𝑙𝑒's home. Hoping to be able to guess how far they were from his own home, he would tie a knot in the cut sinew dangling from his bow for every full day they had walked when they stopped to sleep. With every knot, they traveled farther from his parents. The possibility of never seeing them again grew and grew, like a stone in his gut. After 14 days of eerily silent traveling, during one of their brief rests, the boy mustered up enough courage to speak. "Elder 𝑎𝑔𝑙𝑒," he asked, "why did you take me?" "We took you so that you can learn how to 𝐸𝑎𝑔𝑙𝑒 𝐷𝑟𝑢𝑚𝑠, 𝑎𝑔𝑙𝑒 replied. Puzzled, the boy ventured to ask another question. "What do you mean, 𝐸𝑎𝑔𝑙𝑒 𝐷𝑟𝑢𝑚𝑠, and Niki Naki, elder. They were words that he had never heard before, and he had to pronounce them carefully, rolling them around in his mouth like tiny foreign pebbles. But Savik did not answer. The man simply snorted in disgust and gestured for the boy to get up so that they could continue traveling. And continue traveling they did. On and on they climbed up into the mountains. Every once in a while, Savik would make a camp and give Piña enough food for a few days and disappear, leaving him there. And it was then that Piña began to hear the noise. It resonated through his body, tickling the hairs on his arms and making them stand up. It was a slow, steady pulsation, begging him to move. Then the wind came back, drowning out the sound. When it returned a few moments later, the boy realized that it wasn't a sound at all, but a deep, rhythmic vibration that seemed to come from the mountains themselves. He could feel it in his jaw and his chest. 7 days later, Piña gets up the courage to ask Savik what the noise is. Elder Savik, may I ask you, what is that noise we're hearing, and why does it grow louder each day? The boy's voice startled the man. Savik pointed a black taloned finger toward the top of the mountain, and his face softened a bit as his gaze ran up to its heights. That, young boy, is my mother. The sound grows louder because we get nearer to her. We get nearer to my home. And with that, he turned his face from the boy, and Piña knew not to ask any more questions. What creature could make such sounds, he thought. Savik pushed him harder the closer they got to the mountaintop. Piña was exhausted, his legs leaden and sore. Water was scarcer as they got higher, so he looked for pockets of ice hidden in crevices, tiny streams of snowmelt, or what he could catch when it rained. He had to stop to rest more often. It seemed as if there was never enough air for the boy to breathe, and his lungs burned and ached. Still, Savik marched on until they came to his home. A giant mesa stretched before the boy. Tall stone walls, at least twice the height of a grown man, flanked the sides, forming a cup around the center. The stones buffeted the wind, which was now mostly still. In the center, Piña saw 5 houses surrounding a large hill. Trails of blue smoke billowed from each house, and the faint smell of cooking made his stomach growl and cramp with hunger. Skins dried on racks, and various meats hung next to them, curling in the sun. It looked as if a large family had made this eyrie their home. It was some time before the boy realized that the village seemed empty, not even a dog to announce their arrival. Savik turned to the boy, and for the first time, Piña saw a smile on his lips. It was unsettling. First you will meet my mother, boy. She has more words for you than I do. He turned and began walking to the center of the village. The boy stumbled after the eagle man, eyes wide as he tried to get a better look at his surroundings. The sod houses looked normal to him, except for the entrance tunnels, which were taller than the ones built into his family's home. They approached the large hill in the center, and when they turned a corner, he saw what looked like a long tunnel entrance. He realized that the hill was a hollow, massive sod house, larger than anything he'd ever seen before, easily 20 times the size of his own home. When they got to the entrance of the structure, he paused, pulled together what small scraps of courage he had left, and entered. And that's where he meets Savik's mother. Chapter 5, Mother. Savik shoved the boy forward, making him stumble. He turned around and Savik pushed him again, waving him toward the back of the sod house before ducking out the entrance, leaving the boy alone. Piña took slow steps toward the back of the sod house, where the darkness was deepest and barely visible lamplights twinkled in the far distance. He felt his eyes on him as he walked, and what quiet conversation he could hear quickly stopped as he approached them. After a few more minutes of his slow, shambling shuffle, he reached the rear of the building. The back of the hall was walled off. A soft light emanated from the large opening, framed by wood heavily adorned with shallow carvings. Gritting his teeth, He quickly stepped into the room, not wanting to delay his meeting with Savik's mother. The room was brighter than he expected, and he blinked away tears as he scanned his surroundings. Then he saw her, sitting in a mound of skins piled high like a throne. They gazed at each other, and in that moment, they both seemed unimpressed. For one thing, she was old. Not just aging, but old. Her thin hair was silvery white, her dark skin lined with a myriad of wrinkles. Her jowls sagged, giving her an almost permanent frown. Her parka, though at one time it must have been magnificent, was soiled and tattered. In one gnarled hand, she held a twisted branch that she rubbed with her stained fingers. The smell of rotten meat rose from her, he thought, though he made sure that his face did not show his displeasure. He glanced at her eyes. They were the color of the pyrite he sometimes found on the beach, shimmering with gold and catching the light as they moved, youthful and sharp. "You are disappointed in me, young one?" Her face wrinkled into different shapes. He thought she might be smiling. "I might say that I am also disappointed. You are young, and young ones often do not listen as they should. They think they know everything." Her voice, too, was young, and invoked in him the memory of snowbirds calling in springtime. Sharp against his ear, high-pitched and clear in tone. Not the gravelly voice he expected from a woman her age. Suddenly, Iñupiaq felt ashamed, though he did not know why. He tucked his chin to his chest and stared at the floor. "But you will have to do for my purposes," she said. "I am running out of time." With that, she crooned deep in her throat, a noise only a bird could make. The boy heard the rustle of feathers coming from behind him. His pulse raced, and his ears popped as his blood quickened. She noticed his alarm. "You will stay with me. They have gone to gather the things you will need. My daughters will show you where you will sleep. Has the eldest told you while you are here?" He frowned slightly, and then realized she was talking about Savik. "Yes, Anna. He has told me I am to learn, grandmother." His throat was dry, and his voice crackled across the space between them. He stared back at the floor in front of him, willing his heartbeat to slow down. "And he has told you what will happen should you refuse?" "Yes, Anna. I will join my brothers." The rustle of hides caught his attention, and he glanced up to see her leaning forward, the tip of her branch pointed at him. "And do you wish us harm for what we have done to your family? Do you hold that as your brothers did?" He took a deep breath through his mouth to avoid gagging from her stench, and thought her question over, searching for the truth in his feelings. Revenge would not bring back his brothers. Revenge would not give his parents their youngest son back. All he wanted was to return to his parents, no matter what the future held. "I just want to make it home." "No, Anna," he finally said. "I only wish to see my parents again, to hunt for them as a son would." She leaned back into her skins and placed the branch on her lap, sharp fingers rubbing the twisted curves. She squinted at him. "I believe you, boy, but you must never cross me or my children. You will eat and sleep tonight. Tomorrow I will begin teaching you, and we will see if my opinion of you changes, or yours of me. You will be here until you learn everything, so it is up to you how long you will enjoy our company." Chapter 6, Song. He awoke to a constant stabbing pain in his back. Instinctively, Iñupiaq leaped to his feet, reaching for his knife. When his vision cleared, he found himself staring into the golden eyes of the old woman, her body quaking with stifled laughter. Her overpowering smell flooded his nostrils and made him flinch. She held her stick in front of her like a knife and waved it in his direction. "Shall we fight first, young one? Who do you think would win?" She laughed out loud, her voice echoing through the hall. He sheathed his knife and averted his gaze. I am not used to being awakened in such a way, Anna. Forgive my reaction." There is that politeness again, boy. Come, we are ready to begin your lessons." And she turned away and strode into the middle of the hall. He was surprised by her quick movements and tall height. Even while hunched over, she was quite a bit taller than him. Her hands and face were the only skin showing, and he noticed that on top of her wrinkles, she also had fine, downy, pale hairs all over her skin that reflected the light and made her look like she glowed. Her long, white, greasy hair was pulled back from her face and woven into thin braids that bounced with each of her steps. The beads that hung at the ends of the braids hit each other as she walked, clinking softly. In the center of the hall sat Savik and the two daughters. The daughters glanced briefly at him as he arrived. Though they looked similar, one was a bit older than the other, with fine lines at her eyes and around her frowning mouth. Her skin was darker, the type of shade from being outside for long periods of time. An Iñupiaq-handled ulu hung from her belt, the green-colored stone in the dim light, half sheathed in leather. The other woman was slimmer and wore a shorter parka with dark bird feather leggings underneath. When she moved, the boy could see that the feathers were mostly white at the base. His eyes turned to Savik, who held a wide, thin disc made of pale, almost translucent skin that was stretched across a wooden frame with a small handle on one end. The large disc was about an arm's length across. In his other hand, Savik held a long, thin stick. Was he looking at a weapon? A tool? And what if it is a weapon? What then? The old woman sat herself next to Savik. She cleared her throat impatiently and pointed at the ground across from her. "Sit," she commanded. "We are not planning to harm you. Sit." Pinar quickly sat down, his spine rigid with tension, and waited for the next command. But none came. Their staring made him nervous. He began to sweat. "Now, place your hand on your chest," the old woman said, "and tell me what you feel." Confused, the boy stared wide-eyed at the old woman. "What is the matter? Place your hand on your chest and tell me what you feel. Are you daft?" She turned and made a noise, a guttural trill at the back of her throat. She twisted her head and whispered to the youngest daughter. She turned back to the boy with a stony look. "You may call this daughter 𝐸𝑎𝑔𝑙𝑒, for she brings light to my life like a flower. She will show you what we ask." 𝐸𝑎𝑔𝑙𝑒 gracefully stood up and leaned toward the boy, extending a slim hand. She smiled a little as she came close to him, revealing deep dimples on either side of her small mouth. He closed his eyes, afraid of what might happen next. He didn't know what actions would be offensive to them, didn't know what mysterious lines were crossed that ended his brothers' lives. "Try not to die, try not to die," he said to himself. She wrapped her cold fingers around his and placed his palm flat on his heaving chest. She pressed it there firmly and let go. "Open your eyes, boy," the old woman said to him. "You look foolish." Cautiously, he opened one eye and then the other. "Now," the old woman said, "tell me what you feel with your hand." They all stared at him expectantly. He glanced down at his hand on his chest and frowned. "What mad thing is this?" he thought. I feel the skin of my clothes, Anna, and the bone of my ribs." The old woman snorted and stabbed the air between them with the twisted branch. "Beneath the bone, boy. What do you feel beneath your chest bones?" Concentrating, Pinar pressed his fingers harder into his chest. Again, he felt bone. The only other thing he could feel was my heartbeat, Anna. I feel the pumping of my blood. "Show me what it sounds like," she said excitedly. "Beat your fist on the floor. Show me what the sound is." She leaned back, her face expectant. Slowly, quietly, the boy thumped his fist on the floor, trying to mimic the double beat. But the sound was irregular, not like the steady beat of his heart. His face warmed in embarrassment as he glanced up to see all of them watching his movements. He stopped and sat still, brows drawn down as he glanced at the ground in frustration. He was a skilled hunter with bow and arrow and spear, yet why couldn't he do such a simple thing? 𝐸𝑎𝑔𝑙𝑒 sighed and returned to her mother's side. The eagle mother's face wrinkled into a look of exasperation. "Uva," Savik grunted, getting his attention, and nodded to his own fist, which he thumped against the floor. Thump, 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 thump. The boy nodded and tried again. One was louder, he thought, so he struck the floor harder. The other was softer and came closer on the first. He struggled for a while, but gradually his fist began to beat in perfect rhythm with the pulse in his body. He relaxed into an oddly soothing sound. Iñupiaq was so focused at first that he did not notice the other sounds rising around him. 𝐸𝑎𝑔𝑙𝑒 had begun to strike the edge of the large disc with the stick, softly, almost imperceptibly at first. 𝐸𝑎𝑔𝑙𝑒's beating, like the boy's fist, was perfectly timed with his heartbeat. The two sisters began to speak, but in a way that was unfamiliar to the boy. Their voices rose and fell in time with the pounding. As the combined sounds grew louder, the boy stopped and simply watched and listened, transfixed. 𝐸𝑎𝑔𝑙𝑒 struck his instrument harder, filling the space with sounds that he could feel on his skin. The women stretched their necks toward the roof, pouring their golden words into the air. The eagle mother sat and stared at the boy, head tilted, golden eyes searching his face. Soon the boy was able to make out the words. His arrows were quick, aya, aya. They welcomed death, aya, aya. They loved him still, aya, aya. Their brother, aya, aya. They will come back, they promised, and give themselves again. They will come back and go around the bend, for he is still loved by them, for his hand is kind, for he is still loved by them. Abruptly, the sound stopped. 𝐸𝑎𝑔𝑙𝑒 carefully set down the round instrument. They stared at the boy expectantly. Breathing quickly, Iñupiaq stared into the eagle mother's eyes. His arms were covered in goosebumps, and his throat was wrapped around emotions he couldn't quite name. The muscles in his chest felt tight, and his eyes watered. Eagle Mother smiled. She seemed pleased. The sisters' performance had brought back the day he had hunted the great bull tutu in the tundra grass, the careful way he had treated their dead bodies, the words he had whispered into their velvet ears. Somehow, through the eagle's performance, Iñupiaq had lived it from the other side. A good hunter did not take life lightly. He accepted his role as life taker, not with regret or shame or fear, but with reverence. All hunters dealt with this in different ways, different rituals to ease the spirit of the animal, to connect the hunter with its prey. We are eaters of the souls, plant and animal, living, consuming the living. For those few moments, Iñupiaq had been tutu, caribou. He had felt the lichen in his mouth. He had felt how the caribou knew that he was there in the tall grass, had felt their submission and their judgment of his worthiness. He had felt their emotions, the fear, the many deaths they gave to him, the promise, the cycle of the relationship between hunter and hunted. "What is this magic called, Anna?" he asked. She leaned closer to him, eyes glittering as she nodded. She spoke softly. "It is not magic, boy. It is what every living thing contains. You are here so we can show you how it is done, so you can show others how it is done. Atuktuni nakuruk. It is good to sing. This is called song." The boy nodded, determined, and he lifted his head to speak. "I am willing to learn, Anna, and I am a good listener." At his words, the eagles smiled. This is Eagle Drums by Nasugraq Rainey Hopson, a Newbery Honor Book. It is the origin story of the messenger feast of the Iñupiaq people, which is still celebrated today. It is the myth of how the eagle gods bestowed the Iñupiaq with the gifts of music, song, dance, community, and everlasting tradition. Thank you for joining me today for Chapter Book Storytime. I hope to see you again soon. Thank you. Goodbye.